It was a long flight. Exhaustion weighed heavily on the four friends as they dragged their luggage through the arrival's gate. Thailand's humid air enveloped them the moment they stepped outside. The trip was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, a chance for Eva to escape the pain of her recent breakup. But the closer they got to their hotel, the more uneasy she felt. Eva, Amy, Lisa, and Jenny hailed a taxi and made their way to the hotel by the beach. As the car sped along the coastal road, the golden sands and sparkling ocean seemed to promise peace and tranquility. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over everything. But despite the beautiful scenery, Eva couldn't shake the growing sense of discomfort gnawing at her. When the taxi pulled up in front of the hotel, her first impression wasn't exactly what she expected. The building itself looked fine, white walls, modern design. But as they entered the lobby, the atmosphere shifted. The air inside felt heavy, almost suffocating. The lobby was dimly lit, with flickering lights and an unsettling silence that clung to the space like a ghost. The receptionist barely looked up from the desk when they approached. Her eyes were dull, almost hollow, as if she were simply going through the motions. She handed them the room keys with a mechanical smile that never reached her eyes. "This place feels weird," Lisa whispered, glancing around. Amy shrugged, trying to keep the mood light. "We're probably just tired. Let's get settled, and everything will feel better." They made their way to their rooms. Eva and Amy were sharing one room, while Lisa and Jenny had the room next door. As soon as Eva entered, she felt it again. That strange, heavy feeling, like the room itself was pressing in on her. She dropped her bag by the door and glanced around. The room was small but clean, with modern furnishings. There was a large window that led out to a balcony overlooking the beach. But what caught Eva's attention immediately was the painting on the wall opposite the bed. It was a portrait of a woman, her face partially obscured by shadows. The details of her features were faint, but her eyes seemed to follow Eva as she moved around the room. The longer Eva looked at the painting, the more unsettled she became. There was something about the woman's gaze that felt wrong. "Did you see this painting?" Eva asked Amy, trying to shake off the chill creeping down her spine. Amy looked up briefly. "Yeah, kind of creepy, right? But don't worry about it. It's just some old decoration." Eva forced a smile and tried to focus on unpacking, but every time she looked up, the woman's eyes seemed to be staring directly at her. There was no escape from that gaze. The others came over later, and they all sat out on the balcony, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore should have been calming, but Eva couldn't relax. Her thoughts kept drifting back to her ex-boyfriend, the breakup that still gnawed at her heart, and the eerie painting in the room. Amy, always the cheerful one, tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, Eva. We're here to relax. Don't let your mind wander back to the past." Eva nodded, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. She kept her worries to herself, hoping a good night's sleep would help. The next morning, the four friends agreed to meet at noon for lunch in the hotel lobby. Eva felt particularly tired and told Amy she wanted to sleep a bit longer. Amy, always an early riser, headed down to the cafe in the lobby. Lisa and Jenny joined her shortly after. As noon approached and Eva hadn't shown up, Lisa grew concerned. She decided to call the room to check on her. She dialed the number and waited. After a few rings, someone picked up, but it wasn't Eva. "Hello!" It was a child's voice. Lisa froze. She was sure she had dialed the right number. "I'm sorry, is this Eva's room?" she asked. There was silence on the other end, and then the line clicked dead. Confused, Lisa looked at her phone. "That's weird," she muttered, dialing again. This time, a woman answered. "Yes." The voice was unfamiliar, cold. Lisa's heart began to race. She looked at Amy and Jenny, her face pale. "That wasn't Eva." Amy frowned. "What do you mean?" "I think something's wrong," Lisa whispered, standing up. "We need to check on her." The three friends hurried back to the room. When they knocked, there was no answer at first. They knocked again, harder this time, and finally heard movement inside. The door opened slowly, revealing Eva standing there, pale and shaky. "Eva?" "Are you okay?" Amy asked, stepping forward. Eva nodded weakly, but she looked like she had seen a ghost. "We called your room twice," Lisa said, "but..." "A child answered the first time and then a woman. What's going on?" Eva's eyes widened. You called? Twice?" She sat down on the bed, her hands trembling. "I couldn't move," she whispered. "I was awake, but I couldn't move. There was a little girl. She was sitting on the bed, pulling my hair, and there was a woman. She was trying to force bread into my mouth. I couldn't breathe." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Amy, Lisa, and Jenny exchanged uneasy glances. Was it exhaustion, stress, or was something else at play here? Amy sat beside Eva, trying to comfort her. "It was just a dream. You've been really tired. Maybe it's just from the flight." But Eva shook her head. It didn't feel like a dream. Her gaze drifted to the painting on the wall again. The woman in the painting. Was she smiling now? As night fell, the room's atmosphere shifted from unsettling to oppressive. The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, and despite the balcony doors being tightly shut, Eva could feel a cold draft sweeping through the room. It wasn't the type of cold one could shake off with a blanket. This cold seeped into her bones, chilling her from the inside. Eva lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but replay the strange events from earlier in the day over and over in her mind. The child's voice on the phone, the woman trying to force bread into her mouth, the wet footprints in the bathroom. It all felt too real to dismiss as exhaustion or a dream. Her unease grew as the night deepened. Amy was already fast asleep beside her, oblivious to the change in the room's temperature. But for Eva, sleep seemed impossible. She tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, but the oppressive feeling in the room made it impossible to relax. Then the sound came. Drip, drip, drip. Eva froze, her eyes widening. The sound was faint but distinct, echoing through the quiet room. It wasn't the first time she had heard it. She had heard it earlier that night, the sound of water dripping. Drip, drip, drip. It was coming from the bathroom again. Eva's heart pounded in her chest as she sat up in bed, her body tense with fear. She glanced at Amy, but her friend was still sound asleep. The dripping sound grew louder, more insistent, as if demanding her attention. With a deep breath, Eva swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor felt cold against her bare feet as she slowly made her way toward the bathroom. Every step was filled with dread, her body screaming at her to turn back, but she couldn't ignore the sound. As she reached the bathroom door, she hesitated. The sound of dripping water was steady now, rhythmic. Eva's hand shook as she reached for the doorknob, and when she finally opened the door, she was greeted by darkness. The bathroom was pitch black, save for the faint light filtering in from the street outside. Eva reached for the light switch, but just as her fingers brushed against it, she caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. Her reflection. But it wasn't right. Eva stared into the mirror, her breath catching in her throat. Her reflection was standing there, but it wasn't following her movements. While Eva stood still, staring at it, the reflection remained bent over the sink, as though frozen in the act of washing her face. It was delayed, intentionally out of sync with her own actions. Eva's heart pounded in her chest. She raised her hand slowly, watching the reflection carefully, but it didn't move. Her reflection stayed in its bent position, refusing to meet her eyes. It was wrong, unnatural. Suddenly, the reflection moved. Eva gasped as her reflected self slowly straightened up, its head rising until it finally met her gaze. But the eyes in the mirror, they weren't hers. There was something dark, malevolent, lurking behind them. The reflection smiled, a slow, sinister smile that chilled Eva to her core. The clock struck midnight, and the room seemed to grow even colder, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees. The eerie silence that had filled the room earlier was now broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind outside, blowing against the balcony doors. The oppressive weight of the night pressed down on the room, wrapping it in an unsettling stillness. Eva had finally fallen into a restless sleep, but her mind remained on edge. Dreams twisted in her subconscious, fragmented images of the strange events she had experienced earlier. The little girl pulling her hair, the woman force-feeding her, the reflection that wasn't hers. They all blended together in a whirlwind of confusion and terror. But then, in the darkness, something shifted. Eva stirred in her sleep, her body tense, as though something was pulling at her consciousness. In her dream, she felt a cold presence near her, watching, waiting. She struggled to wake up, but her body wouldn't respond. The feeling of paralysis gripped her again, just like it had earlier when the woman had appeared by her bedside. Her breath quickened, but she couldn't move. Not a finger, not a toe. Suddenly, the pressure in the room intensified, as if an unseen force was closing in on her. Eva's eyelids fluttered open, and what she saw made her heart stop. There, at the foot of her bed, stood the same woman, the wet, dripping figure she had seen before. Her long, soaked hair clung to her face, and water dripped from her dress onto the floor, pooling at her feet. Her eyes were dark, lifeless, and fixed directly on Eva. Eva tried to scream, to call out for Amy, but her voice was gone. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She was trapped, helpless, her body completely under the control of this ghostly presence. The woman took a slow, deliberate step forward. Water dripped from her clothes with each movement, echoing in the silence of the room. She reached out a pale, bony hand toward Eva, her cold fingers brushing against Eva's skin. The touch was like ice, sending shivers down her spine. And then, Eva's mind went blank. Her entire body relaxed, her muscles going limp. Her eyes remained open, but her consciousness was no longer present. She had been taken over, her body now a puppet for the spirit that controlled her. To anyone watching, Eva would have seemed calm, almost peaceful. Her face was expressionless, her eyes empty. She sat up slowly, moving with the grace of someone sleepwalking. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, but there was no life behind them, just a hollow vessel being guided by something else. Without a word, Eva slid out of bed and walked toward the balcony doors. The cold wind blew in through the tiny cracks, but Eva didn't shiver. She reached for the handle, her fingers curling around it, and with a soft creak, the doors swung open. Outside, the night was dark, the ocean waves crashing against the shore in the distance. The wind whipped around the balcony, howling like a distant, mournful cry. Eva stepped outside, her feet bare against the cold concrete. The chill in the air was biting, but she didn't react. Her body moved with purpose, driven by the will of the spirit that had taken hold of her. She reached the railing, her hands gripping the cold metal tightly. The wind tugged at her hair, blowing it across her face, but her expression remained blank. Her eyes stared out at the dark sea, unblinking, as the voice in her head whispered softly, "Jump!" Eva's body stiffened. Her hands tightened around the railing, her knuckles turning white. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Jump! He's waiting for you." In her mind, buried deep within the fog of the spirit's control, Eva could see him, her ex-boyfriend, standing at the bottom of the balcony, his arms outstretched, calling to her. He looked just as he had the last time she had seen him, before everything fell apart. His face was soft, smiling, full of love. "Come to me," his voice whispered, blending with the voice of the spirit. Eva's body leaned forward, her toes curling over the edge of the balcony. She felt weightless, as though the wind itself was lifting her, carrying her toward him. The voice in her mind urged her forward, its cold fingers wrapped around her soul. Just as her body began to tip over the edge, a sharp cry broke through the fog. "Eva!" "No!" It was Amy's voice. Amy had woken up, her instincts alerting her that something was terribly wrong. When she looked over at Eva's bed and saw it empty, panic gripped her heart. She scrambled out of bed, her eyes darting around the room, and then she saw it. The open balcony doors and Eva standing on the edge about to fall. "Eva!" Amy screamed again, running toward the balcony. She reached Eva just in time, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her back from the brink. Eva's body slumped into Amy's arms, limp and unresponsive. For a moment, it seemed as though she wouldn't wake up. But then, slowly, her eyes fluttered open. "Amy?" Eva whispered weakly, her voice barely audible. Amy's heart was pounding in her chest. She pulled Eva back into the room, shutting the balcony doors behind them. Eva's body trembled as Amy sat her down on the bed, her face pale and drained of color. "What were you doing?" Amy asked, her voice shaking. "You almost jumped." Eva shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. I don't know. I don't remember. I couldn't control it." Tears welled up in Eva's eyes as the realization of what had just happened began to sink in. She had been moments away from falling to her death, completely unaware of her own actions. "I saw him," Eva whispered, her voice trembling. "He was calling to me, my ex. I thought he was waiting for me." Amy's eyes widened in horror. She grabbed Eva's hand, squeezing it tightly. "That wasn't him, Eva. It wasn't real. It was something else. Something evil." The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of Amy's words hung in the air. Eva glanced over at the painting on the wall, her breath catching in her throat. The woman in the painting, her expression had changed again. This time, her smile was twisted, almost triumphant, as though she had been watching the entire time, enjoying every moment of Eva's torment. Eva sat on the edge of the bed, her body still trembling from the shock of what had just happened. She couldn't stop thinking about how close she had come to falling, how close she had come to something far worse. Her mind was clouded with fear and confusion, and the more she tried to make sense of it, the more everything seemed to blur together. Amy sat beside her, keeping a firm grip on her hand. She could feel the tremors running through Eva's body, and her own heart was still racing from the adrenaline of the moment. They were both shaken, but Amy knew they needed to think clearly. Something was very wrong with this hotel, and if they didn't leave soon, she feared that something even worse could happen. The room was unnervingly quiet, except for the occasional rustle of the wind against the balcony doors. The oppressive cold still lingered in the air, and it felt as though the room itself was watching them, waiting. Eva stared blankly at the floor, her mind racing. "I don't understand. I didn't even know what I was doing. I saw him, Amy. I really saw him. He was standing there, waiting for me." Amy shook her head, her voice firm but gentle. "That wasn't him, Eva. Whatever you saw, it wasn't real. It was something else. Something trying to make you jump." Eva's eyes filled with tears as she tried to wrap her mind around what had happened. But it felt so real. "I don't understand why this is happening." Amy placed a hand on Eva's shoulder, squeezing it gently. "I don't know why either, but we need to get out of here. We can't stay in this hotel. Not after what just happened." The words hung in the air, heavy with urgency. Eva nodded slowly, her mind still foggy but starting to clear. She could feel the cold, clammy sweat on her skin, and her body ached from the strain of whatever had taken control of her. The memory of standing on the edge of the balcony, ready to jump, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Just then, a knock on the door broke the silence. It was quick, almost impatient, and both Amy and Eva jumped at the sudden sound. "It's us. Open up." Lisa's voice came from the other side, filled with concern. Amy hurried over to the door and unlocked it, letting Lisa and Jenny in. Both of them looked pale, their faces etched with worry. It was clear that they had sensed something was wrong from the moment they woke up. "What happened?" Lisa asked, her eyes flicking between Amy and Eva. "We heard you shouting." Eva sat quietly, her eyes still wide with fear. She looked at Lisa and Jenny, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain what had just happened? How could she put into words the sheer terror of being controlled by something she didn't understand? Amy spoke for her, explaining the horrifying events that had unfolded. As she recounted the details, the ghostly woman, the balcony, Eva's near-death experience, the color drained from Lisa and Jenny's faces. "Oh my God," Jenny whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "That's insane. Eva, are you okay?" Eva nodded weakly, but it was clear that she wasn't okay. She had been through something none of them could have anticipated. The weight of the situation hung heavy over them all. "We can't stay here," Amy said, her voice resolute. "Whatever's in this hotel, it's not safe. We need to leave." First thing in the morning, Lisa and Jenny both nodded in agreement, their eyes wide with fear. "Yeah, no way we're staying another night here," Lisa added. "I don't care how tired we are. We have to go." Eva sat quietly for a moment, processing everything. The events of the last few hours played over and over in her mind, and every time she thought about that woman, the ghost that had stood at the foot of her bed, her heart raced with terror. But the thought of leaving the hotel felt like a lifeline. She needed to get out of there, away from the suffocating fear and the evil presence that seemed to lurk in every corner. She could feel it watching her even now, and the idea of spending another minute in that room made her skin crawl. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, bathing the room in a pale, soft glow. The oppressive weight of the night had lifted, but the tension among the four friends remained. After last night's horrifying events, they all knew there was no way they could stay another night. Eva sat quietly on the edge of the bed, staring out at the morning light. Her body was exhausted, but sleep had been impossible after what had happened on the balcony. The memory of almost jumping haunted her, the voice that had called her toward the edge still echoing in her mind. Despite her friends' attempts to comfort her, the fear lingered. Amy, Lisa, and Jenny packed their things in silence, their faces pale and their movements quick. There was a mutual understanding. They needed to get out of the hotel as soon as possible. "We're checking out," Amy said, breaking the quiet. "No arguments." Eva nodded, barely hearing her. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the figure of the ghostly woman and the chilling smile of the portrait. She hadn't dared look at the painting again, afraid of what she might see in the woman's eyes. The group hurried down the hallway, the oppressive feeling still lingering even as the morning sun bathed the corridors in light. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of the wind made them jump, their nerves frayed from the terror of the previous night. At the front desk, the receptionist greeted them with the same hollow smile she had worn when they first arrived. If she noticed their anxious expressions or hurried departure, she didn't show it. "Checking out early?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes," Amy said curtly, avoiding eye contact. The receptionist nodded, typing something into the computer without further questions. It was almost as if this had happened before, as if guests fleeing the hotel early wasn't a rare occurrence. They left the hotel quickly, the fresh morning air finally offering them a sense of relief. For the first time since their arrival, they felt like they could breathe again. They loaded their luggage into the waiting taxi, eager to leave the haunted place behind. As the car sped away, Eva found herself looking back at the hotel. The building loomed in the distance, its white walls gleaming in the daylight. It seemed so ordinary in the sunlight, so out of place for the horrors that had taken place within its walls. But just as the car turned a corner and the hotel was about to disappear from view, Eva saw it. Standing on the balcony, watching them leave, was the woman. Her hair still wet, her expression twisted into that same terrifying smile. The new hotel was everything the last one wasn't. Bright, modern, and filled with the lively bustle of other tourists. It offered a stark contrast to the eerie silence and dark atmosphere they had just escaped. For the first time since arriving in Thailand, the friends felt some semblance of safety. But for Eva, the terror still lingered just below the surface. She tried to act normal, joining in the conversation and forcing a smile as they settled into their new rooms. But the memory of what had happened haunted her every waking moment. The cold fingers of fear wouldn't let go. They sat together in the hotel's cafe, sipping coffee and trying to push past the events of the previous night. Eva listened to her friends talk, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the woman on the balcony, the icy grip of her presence still fresh in her mind. Amy glanced at Eva and saw the faraway look in her eyes. She reached over, giving her arm a reassuring squeeze. "It's over now, Eva. We're safe." Eva nodded, but deep down, she wasn't so sure. Something about the way the ghost had looked at her, the way her smile had twisted with cruel intent. It made her feel as though it wasn't over. Not yet. The final day of their trip passed in a blur. Eva did her best to hide her fear, not wanting to worry her friends any further. Every time she was alone, though, the memories crept back in. The voice urging her to jump, the cold hands pulling her toward the edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit was still watching her, even from a distance. When they packed their bags to leave the next morning, Eva was filled with a sense of relief. She looked forward to getting home, far away from the hotel and everything that had happened there. As the car pulled away from the new hotel, Eva glanced out of the window, her emotions a mix of relief and residual fear. She had tried her best to put on a brave face, but the shadows of that terrifying experience still lurked in the corners of her mind, ready to resurface when she least expected it. But as she stared out at the passing scenery, something caught her eye. For a brief moment, reflected in the rearview mirror, she thought she saw the outline of a figure standing in the distance. A figure with long, dripping hair and a twisted smile. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. When she looked again, it was gone. Eva closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe the nightmare really was over. But as the car drove further away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her. And that's the chilling tale of Eva and her friend's terrifying experience in Thailand. But now, we want to hear from you. What would you do if you found yourself in a haunted hotel? Would you stay and try to communicate with the ghost? Or would you get out as fast as you can? And for a little fun, if you had to stay, what would be your plan? Would you befriend the ghost and share some snacks? Or try to bargain for a free room upgrade? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever experienced anything spooky while traveling? We'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more bone-chilling tales. Stay tuned, because the next story might just haunt your dreams.